The Spring Statement, Chancellor of the Exchequer Rachel Reeves.
This Labour government was elected to bring change to our country. Restoring stability to our public finances resulted in higher bills, in higher rents and higher mortgages.
Well, what the British people know, Mr. Speaker, is that this is a consequence of her choices. She and the Prime Minister reneged on their promises to the British people during the last general election.
Hello Envy UK, I'm Pete, welcome to the channel, and that you've just seen from Rachel Reeves is a masterclass on how to polish a turd. Absolutely shocking. At the Spring Statement on Wednesday, following the Prime Minister's questions, I had the misfortune of listening to a good 10 minutes of dribble. Now, I have put up and shared the video of the Spring Statement in its entirety, so you can feel free to go and check that out. It's about here right now, and that will... Actually, it's about here. And that will bring you up to speed on all of the developments and all of the questions from your MPs. There was quite a few cutting ones. So anyway, what we've got here is we've got to have a look at a couple of things here. I'm going to concentrate a little bit more on PIP payments and benefits and the actual detriment caused to our most vulnerable people who need help because of disabilities. It's just absolutely shocking, but first, talking about growth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This emergency budget, Mr. Speaker, has brought the Right Honourable Lady to a cold, hard reckoning. She has become very fond recently to talk about the world having changed. Well, indeed it has, Mr. Speaker. This country was growing at the fastest rate in the G7 only about a year ago. And just as the OECD and the Bank of England and other forecasters, and now we learn today, the OBR have stated, growth has been halved in this year, cut in two as a consequence of the decisions and the choices that the Right Honourable Lady made on her watch.
Yeah. That's pretty cutting. So there you go. Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor, has exposed Rachel's plan for exactly what it is. Smoke and mirrors. Like I said at the top of the show, you can only polish a turd so much before, it becomes exposed. And that is exactly what this Spring Statement is. It's an exposure of incompetence and inability to manage the public finances. I don't know why Rachel from Accounts is in the role. She lied on a LinkedIn page. She lied on a CV. She's a liar and cannot be trusted. Most politicians are absolutely in the same boat. They all fight like rats in a sack and they're all depressing. So hopefully we can bring out some context. Now, it's not just Mel that talked about growth. There was another gentleman here. Listen to this.
To come back with more tax increases. But could I turn to the OBR page 5, 1.2, where it says, while the government's planning reforms deliver a modest boost to the level of potential output of 0.2% in 2029, its cumulative growth between 2023 to 2029 is still half a percentage point lower than we projected in October. And the level of productivity is 1% lower. I'd like to know what the Chancellor thinks about that, and can she confirm that the Employment Rights Bill has not been evaluated by the OBR?
Wow, there you go. So it's not just Mel saying what it is because he's the Shadow Chancellor. It's actually in the OBR report that growth will only be half of what it was. Now, Rachel stood up. You can see the full story, as I mentioned here. Stood up and said, but the date started from 2023 and we weren't in government in 2023, so it doesn't count. Well, no, it really does count because you're in government now and you've got another, unfortunately, 4 years and 2 months, not that I'm counting slightly, left in power. So I think that it's a shame. So what does it mean then? If you're a PIP receiver, personal independence payment, which is a scheme designed to help you back into work, what does this benefits grab mean to you? Well, I kind of covered it in brief on my last video. You can see that here. But what it means is you're going to have a harder time getting support for disability help back into work. Now, this Labour government think that currently if you're claiming for PIP payments or universal credit health payments, then you're a chancer, you're robbing the system and you don't deserve it. 350,000 people will be pushed into relative poverty. Oh, actually, 250,000 will be pushed into poverty. 50,000 of that is children. When did we think that that was acceptable? Let me know in the comments what you think about that. Are you affected by this? Is one of your children going to be affected by this? It's crazy. 96% of the families who will lose out financially because of this have a disabled person in their household. 96%. Talk about ambush. The benefits cuts are literally going to lead to what I perceive as a Labour internal civil war. They're trying to make these cuts to create what we call headroom. So the government needs, it's a bit like what we call in our domestic households as our rainy day account, a fund, our savings account. The thing, if the boiler goes, we get that and we put that money towards it because we never have enough money, right? So the government need the same kind of buffer. They need their kind of emergency stash, and they call that headroom. So if you watch the debate back, or the statement and the debate back, you will hear headroom a lot. Headroom, headroom. And that's what it means, is the government's slush fund to be able to deal with an emergency. Since the October budget, that slush fund has gone. It's wiped out because of her stupid... Not her stupid, sorry, that's wrong. Her government, her colleagues, doling out money to the rest of the world and not giving it to the British people. We're literally in the same boat as America in the last 5 years, where they give everyone the money except their own people who are paying. We're paying tax so that we can get benefit. We're not paying tax to give the rest of the world the benefit. They've got their own nuclear weapon programs. They can afford themselves. Why are we still giving money to India and China when they've got nuclear weapons and space programs? It doesn't make sense. Anyway, so what's going to happen is, well, actually, the universal credit rate itself, albeit going up from next week to a £7 increase to £92 a week, in 4 years, it's actually projected to be a cut in benefits. So it won't be £107, it'll be £106, but by the by, it's still a cut and it's still not the right direction from the manifesto promises that Labour government give us. They told us everything was totally costed and funded, or funded and costed. I can't remember what way round their lies go, but that's what they told us, and they reneged on it. Universal credit incapacity benefit, which is for people who are unable to work because maybe an injury at work or maybe a long-term sickness, their claims are frozen. They will be frozen at £50 a week for that add-on benefit until the end of Parliament. Existing claimants will see their UCH, their Universal Credit Health, frozen. Okay, so there's going to be no more increase to match inflation, no more money. If you're not on it now and you try to get it, impossible. I'm sorry, this is Labour for you. This is what 20% of the country voted for in a general election. I have a feeling in the next general election we're going to get a Brexit-style turnout. So, yeah, 370,000 people are going to lose support with an average loss of £4,500 per person per year based on the reductions in benefit. 430,000 people in the future will now not get PIP payments, PIP benefits, which they would have previously been entitled to. That's almost 500,000 people who are genuine. Well, let's just say half of that. So 215,000 genuine people need that help that they paid tax for to receive the help when you need it. They're not going to get it. And this is causing a fracas within Labour. It's brilliant. So left-wing Labour MPs, and I'd say left-wing because Labour is generally radical left lunatics, but these two in particular, Richard Burgon and Kim Johnson, have actually come out to make statements against the government. So I'll quote it. Richard says, This statement contains cruel attacks on disabled people. The government is taking an easy option of cutting support for millions of vulnerable people rather than making the wealthiest pay. He says, I'll vote against these cuts to disability benefits. The government must drop them. Ms Johnson added to this by her own statement saying, today's spring statement confirms our worst fears. Cuts to PIP and universal credit will devastate my constituents. She's recognising she's getting flack. She's getting bombarded with emails, with calls, with whatevers, saying, what are you doing? We voted for you and now you turned your back on us. You've done the dirty. So I'll continue. I've already received panicked calls and emails from people who simply don't know how they'll survive, just says what I've just said. In Liverpool, we know the reality of austerity, poverty and government neglect. We've lived through it before and now under a Labour government, it's back. And that's a Labour politician quoting this. She added, I'll be voting against any government legislation to enact these changes. I cannot support these measures that will make our most vulnerable poorer and widen inequality across the country. Well said. Ms Johnson, you don't belong in the Labour Party. Get out quick. Liberal Democrats are waiting for you. But there you go. I mean, I grew up in the Wirral. Hi, Alan. Hi, Laura, if you're watching. And there's never been any money there. Not in a month of Sundays. So now there's going to be even less, which will push people into poverty. And I'm afraid to say, people will start to look at other ways of generating finance. And sometimes that means crime. They have nowhere to go, no other opportunities, no other ways out of it. And unfortunately, they might be sucked into some nefarious means of making money. Breaks my heart. Breaks my heart. Another Labour minister, Zara Sultana, who I vehemently disagree with regularly. I'm allowed to say that. That's my opinion. Nothing against her other than her policies. That's different. So this is a policy attack, not a personal attack. But she has come out today with a really credible statement saying about Miss Reeves. She says, Ms Reeves has accepted £7,500 worth of free clothing and recently took freebie tickets to see Sabrina Carpenter. Since Labour come into power, 25,000 more children have been pushed into poverty due to the two-child benefit cap, and now, according to the government's own impact assessment, 250,000 people will be pushed into poverty and another 100,000 people into relative poverty as a result of these cuts. So she asks the Chancellor, I'm still quoting, who earns over £150,000 annually and has accepted these free gifts worth £7,500 and the tickets, does she think austerity 2.0 is the change that people really voted for? There's 3 Labour ministers coming out openly against their own government. The civil war has started. So anyway, Mrs Reeves, it's fair to give balance to this. She's come back and stated there's nothing progressive and there's nothing Labour about pouring more money into a broken system under the changes that they're bringing out. We're going to help young people who are not in education, employment or training by giving them targeted support. 2 things there. Firstly, she didn't address the benefit cut or the PIP payment reduction. She went on to talk about employment. Now, secondly, Mel talks about employment really well. Sorry, Mel Stride.
And the OBR also says, Mr Speaker, that unemployment will be rising this year and next year and the year after. And in fact, across the forecast period, it will not decline at all.
The OBR's words, what can you say? The Office of Budget Responsibilities are there to give a credible analysis on the data and the figures being presented by whichever government is in power. She goes on to say, as she set out in the statement earlier, the OBR so far have not scored any of the back to work programmes, which is the biggest back to work programme that we've seen for many, many years. They are going to do that work over the autumn. But we know the best way to lift people out of poverty is get them back to work, is to get them into good work, secure work, and a decent paying wage. Now, that's all very well talking about a decent paying wage, but will people spend the money? Or will people sit on the money? Because if they don't spend the money, it creates inflation. Now, here, Mel Stride again.
Inflation, which was down to 2%, bang on target on the very day of the last general election under a Conservative government. We are now told this year will be running at twice the level as was forecast under ourselves in 2024. This is going to mean prices bearing down on households and on businesses right across the country because of her choices.
Yeah, absolutely. So up until now, the government's refused to reveal how many people will lose their PIP payments. The number has sort of been floated around 800,000 people. So if you've got a disability and you're trying to get back into work, these PIP payments are crucial for travel, for clothing, for what expenditure you need to get that foot on the ladder of employment. It's basically, to quote John Tridkett, I hope I pronounced that right, a veteran Labour MP, another Labour MP, that's the fourth one in this episode. He's quoted, "Ministers are effectively picking on the disabled people, and Rachel Reeves should look elsewhere to save money." The government's only going to save £4.8 billion on this deal, on this benefit raid, instead of the £5 million that they'd actually hoped for. The Labour MP Debbie Abrahams, who chairs the Work and Pensions Committee, said to the Commons she recognises the difficulties that Ms Reeves, is facing in terms of fiscal challenges and so on that she inherited, and she supports the reforms that Liz Kendall has set out. All the evidence is pointing to the fact that the cuts to the health and disability benefits will lead to increased poverty, including severe poverty and worsened health conditions as well. How will making people sicker and poorer help in terms of driving our economy up and our people into jobs? Let's hear from Mel again about it.
And the OBR also says, Mr. Speaker, that unemployment will be rising this year and next year and the year after. And in fact, across the forecast period, it will not decline at all.
Makes you sick. Makes you sick. So what we've got to think about is where the money's coming from. We're getting a record amount of millionaires leaving the country, and billionaires, of course, leaving the country. I heard a figure a few months ago that it was 1 in every 45 minutes. Every 45 minutes, a millionaire has exported their wealth from the UK, which is making it more difficult for Labour to get that money in. You know, what's the Chancellor's answer to this? She says, well, you know, we're struggling because of the £22 million black hole. We've got a clip about that too.
The real black hole is not the one the Chancellor invented, it is the one the Chancellor created.
Exactly, she's created this hole by spending, £19 billion giving away the Chagos Islands, which is ours. It doesn't need to be given away. £19 billion. That's 4 times over the target of the benefits raid of £5 billion. Some other things to think about while we're doing this is mortgages. So mortgages will be affected, of course, because with inflation set to rise, mortgage payments increase. The idea is if you have to pay more for your mortgage, you're not spending enough money, you're not got enough money to spend, inflation comes down. It's a vicious cycle, this money business. You're looking at around, at the moment, let me just check. The average interest rate is at the moment 3.7%, expected to raise to 4.7%, a whole percentage point by 2028. So only 3 years, 2.5 years from now. Late payments and self-assessment and fraud. This is a key one because I actually talked about this in a previous video. It was the 4 mega taxes video. One of them was if you are late putting in your self-assessment, return at the end of January. And actually, someone in my comments actually corrected me that it isn't a tax, it's a fine. You get £100 fine for a late filing now, but they're putting that up to maybe 500 quid, £1,000, which is going to create up to £1 billion a year of people who are trying their best to earn a living and support their families and add to the economy by the tax they pay. Granted, we need to go after people who aren't paying, who are defrauding the system by filing underpayments and whatnot. So that's one thing. Now, I did float the fact that the Chagos Islands, we could save £19 billion. What do you think, Mel?
Would she scrap the absurd Chagos deal and put that money behind our armed forces?
Well, Rach, we're waiting. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there because I know I've been going on for quite a bit. Thank you ever so much for watching. If you've actually made it to this stage, please hit the subscribe button for me. The channel is really going great now. I'm enjoying bringing the news to you. Fantastic short coverage. We're well on the way. It is good. So hit the like, hit the share, hit the subscribe, do all that stuff. And I will see you guys on the next one. It's Pete from MV UK. Thank you very much and all the best.